So we have started discussing chapter 6, and we have already discussed the basic random number generation things, which are of course already known. Today I will continue that discussion first with talking about a little bit on Monte Carlo integration. Again, Monte Carlo integration is known to you, correct?
Yes, sir.
So again, this is just a recap before we get on to the actual topic of how to use these techniques in modeling our differential equations, characteristic functions, etc. Not modeling, rather computing. Okay, so Monte Carlo integration. So I'll go through these things quickly because these are already known. So we are essentially interested in evaluating an integral fx dx over some unit cube is. So think of a unit cube in S dimensions, which is 0, 1, cross 0, 1, cross 0, 1, etc. S times. So that is my is. So it is called a unit cube. And my interest is in the integral of f. Now, think of a very naive situation where we want to numerically evaluate this integral for a 20-dimensional cube. So if I were talking about one dimension, s equal to 1, then maybe I would think of cutting the interval 0 to 1 into 100 pieces, or maybe more. If I go into 2 or 3 dimensions, I will reduce that number probably from 100 to 20 or 10, because the total number of points would be in power. If I do similar thing for a 20-dimensional situation, then it's going to be an impossibly large grid. Even if I have 10 points for each dimension, that's impossibly large, 10 to the power 20. So this is never going to be work like that. And this is the curse of dimensionality. And we want to avoid this difficulty of computing integrals in high dimension. So to overcome this particular hurdle, what people employ is the Monte Carlo integration. So what is it really? Instead of trying to compute the integral via this numerical integration scheme, so you do it systematically, 10 points in power 20, etc. We just sample a set x1, x2, xn, x capital N, where capital N I will choose, of uniformly distributed n vectors over this whole cube. So in this whole cube, I sample uniformly distributed vectors x1, x2, xn. So I sample points. And I simply evaluate the function f at these points to finally get an approximation for the integral. So my approximation is a simple arithmetic average. Theta n is simple average of this f, where is hat is the volume of the integration domain is. So if it's an unit cube, then it's not a problem, but sometimes we look at arbitrary dimension, arbitrary lengths. So we need to also take care of the dimension. And this is our approximation for the integral. So we say that integral fx dx is approximately equal to this theta n, this arithmetic average. Now, what are we using here? We are using the law of large numbers. So we are banking on the fact that when capital N approaches infinity, the number of sample points, the limit of theta n, which is this simple average, will actually converge to the correct integral. Why? Because if I sum over this fxi, I will be getting a good approximation of the expectation as n goes to infinity. So that's the simple logic of this approach. And of course, we are using the probability, using the uniform probability, the probability of XL that is uniform over IS. Each Xi is uniformly distributed. That's one question. So we can reasonably hope that if we have large enough capital N, the arithmetic average will be close enough to the actual integral. The second question that we are typically interested in is how fast does it converge to the true value? Or we want to quantify the convergence rate of this integral or convergence rate of this arithmetic average to the integral. So quantify the convergence rate, we define the error term as delta n. So delta capital N dependent on n is the error term. So it's the integral minus theta n, where theta n is nothing but my earlier arithmetic mean. I now write delta n as an arithmetic mean of individual errors, so that I can do this simple multiplication division on the volume is hat, take it outside, so that inside what I have is a weighted part of the integral minus fxi. Call this quantity as your delta fxi. So this is the notation that we introduced. Delta fxi is this. So then delta n is nothing but average of the delta fxi's. Now again, by using the same logic as before, it would be very easy to show that expectation of delta fxi will be 0. So on an average, I do not make error because of this large number with this law. And also, if I consider two different points, xi and xj, because it is uniformly distributed, we can consider these points to be independent. So then delta fxi and delta fxj will also be uncorrelated. So it works like a simple random sampling scheme. We have used the same logic when we deduced the standard error for a simple random sampling scheme. So we want to figure out variance of delta n. And for variance of delta n, this is the expression that we typically have. Expectation of delta n will be 0. So this is the square error. And this square error can be now rewritten as integral of f square minus integral of f whole square. So that's the standard way of writing the square. Now again, define this term in the second bracket as sigma square f. This is my so-called variance of the function f, if the function is itself stochastic. So then variance of delta n would be nothing but is square hat by n sigma square f. So we have more or less recovered the simple random sampling result. So we can say that the error of Monte Carlo integration can be reduced by increasing n, because n appears in the denominator with power 1. And the rate of convergence for the standard error will be roughly 1 by root n. So this is the canonical result that we typically get from a simple random sampling scheme. So we have, for the Monte Carlo integration rule, a convergence to the true value due to the law of large numbers, and a 1 by root n rate of convergence through the simple random sampling type argument. So far, so good. So one point here is that the variance expression, we can see how the Monte Carlo integration resolves the curse of dimensionality. For instance, if I have s equal to 20 and we sample 10 to the power 6 points rather than 10 to the power 20 points, so because earlier we started out with that, then the error will be approximately of the order of 10 to the power minus 3. And hence, if my sample size is independent of the dimension, then the magnitude of the error term will also be independent of the dimension. So that way, Monte Carlo integration sort of bypasses the curse of dimensionality. However, as we know that 1 by root n is pretty slow. It is not as fast as we would like to be. To improve that, we will discuss some techniques, and in particular, we will talk about variance reduction method. So variance reduction method is a very popular method in high dimensional statistical work, and that we will discuss later on. Okay. So now, knowing the variance, we can also set up an error bound as an indicator of how accurate this result is, this Monte Carlo integration result is. It just gives a sense of accuracy. It is not a strict bound. And typically it is written like this: integral fx dx is approximately the arithmetic average plus minus the bound here. So this is not in the traditional way of writing plus minus some alpha critical level into standard error. This is just a rudimentary way of indicating how much the variance is. So how much in general we might be expected to deviate on the left or on the right. So this is just a rudimentary kind of idea. If the function that we are interested in is a constant, because we are talking about integration, if the function is a constant function rather than an actual curve, then sigma square f will be 0. Which means if I have a flat function, if I have a function which is reasonably flat, the variance will be even smaller. The sigma square f will be smaller, so the overall term will also be smaller. So if we can find a transformation that changes the coordinate x to a new coordinate y, in which the transformed function is rather flat, or at least relatively flatter, then we can reduce the variance of Monte Carlo integration. And this is the essence of the variance reduction technique. So the variance reduction technique that we will discuss will work through a change in the coordinate system to achieve a relatively more flat function that we are integrating. Another relevant observation here is that sigma square f involves two integrals. Sigma square f actually has two integrals here. Which can be estimated approximately through the Monte Carlo method again by viewing this 1 by is hat inside the integral as the uniform probability density. So sigma square f I can think of as the uniform integral over a uniform probability density, and then sigma square f can be written approximately as this summation minus this sum whole square, where again the summation replaces the integral through the law of large number, where xi are sampled uniformly. Okay, so this is the basically the recap of the Monte Carlo integration, which I guess all of you already know. So this should be simple. So if there are any departure from what you traditionally know as Monte Carlo integration, just let me know. Is this approach the same as what you have been taught? The Monte Carlo integration? Of course, we are not talking about very complicated situation here. We are talking about a simple numerical evaluation, but is it consistent?
Yes, sir. We learned this.
You of course know this. I know that you know. All I want to check is whether the conceptualization is consistent with what I am now discussing. Okay. So there are variants to the typical Monte Carlo methods, and one typical variation is called a quasi Monte Carlo methods. What is that? So it is nothing but in Monte Carlo method, in the true Monte Carlo method, we sample uniformly from the domain, from the unit cube or whatever is the relevant domain. In a quasi Monte Carlo method, we select points deterministically. Specifically, in a quasi method, we will produce a deterministic sequence of points that provides the best possible spread in the unit cube. Because if I sample uniformly, there might be spaces which are sparsely populated, sparsely sampled, and segments which is more densely sampled. I don't want that. Instead, I would want to spread the sample points as uniformly as possible, uniformly quote unquote, to give me the best possible spread over IS. There are certain popular choices Some of these are Halton sequence, Sobol sequence, Ford sequence, etc. If you look at the figure 6.2 in the book, it gives an example of a two-dimensional low discrepancy sequence from a Halton set. So basically, you will immediately observe that there is nothing random about these points. So I will just open this book, maybe show you the picture. Right. So this is the picture I was talking about. So can you see figure 6.1?
Yes, sir.
So figure 6.1 is actually uniform sample. So I have picked uniform samples on the unit square. So S equal to 2. And you can see that there are spaces which are more densely sampled and spaces which are less densely sampled. Now, compared to that, look at the Halton set. This is figure 6.2, which is called a low discrepancy sample. And now you can see this is quote unquote more uniform than the uniform sample in 6.1. So here the density is chosen to be similar in all segments. So these are the quasi-Monte Carlo sample points that I am talking about. Okay, so these are not statistically done, as you can say. So obviously statistical methods for studying the properties of the integral will not apply. So if I were to ask you that, okay, what is the variance of delta n in a quasi-Monte Carlo method, that would be extremely difficult to find analytically. But of course, given the strategy, one can make sure that the numerical performance is superior. So quasi-Monte Carlo methods are useful in certain situations, but of course, the properties cannot be studied analytically. Okay, so that's the Monte Carlo integration that we are going to use, and also the random number generation strategies that we have discussed earlier. So why are we talking about these? Because we are interested in solving our derivative contract pricing problems. And in particular, we are interested in solving for stochastic differential equations. So let us recall chapter 4. So chapter 4, there were many models which were expressed in terms of a stochastic differential equation. Now, in this section 6.6, we will review how to simulate the evolution of a random process using its stochastic differential equation. So the SDE actually gives the data generating process for the random variable or the random quantity under study, which is typically the price. So instead of trying to handle that analytically, we will now try to simulate the evolution of this process. Of course, if we can solve the SDE directly, then there is no need to simulate, because in the canonical problems that we could actually do the integration, we need not get into simulation and all those expensive methods. So if we can solve, then we don't need to simulate across a set of discrete points. We can just use the solution of the SDE and use the solution directly to simulate samples at any point in time directly. So it is the other way around. We don't need simulation to solve. We can use the solution and then simulate sample points any way we like. But as we have already discussed, except for some really nice cases, it is rarely the situation that the solution of an SDE is independent of its path. And therefore, in most cases, we will not be able to solve it analytically. We have used some approximation techniques earlier, numerical approximation techniques, but even those approximation techniques may become very complicated or maybe not even possible in some complicated derivative contract situations. So in real life, in most cases, we really need to discretize the SDE and then simulate over each time interval. So we are basically going to create paths, simulate paths, and then average over all the paths to arrive at a reasonable approximation for the prices. That would be our approach. So we are not able to analytically generate solutions or not even numerically approximate the final solution. Rather, we are forced to generate sample paths, many sample paths in practical applications, and then average over them to arrive at a reasonable approximation of the true price. So for most of the path dependent options, this would be our only method available. So let us start with the generic simple SDE. dxt is mu dt plus sigma dw, where both mu and sigma can be time dependent and also may depend on the stock price itself. So this is the generalized setup that we talked about before. Our starting time is T naught and terminal time is capital T. And the starting point is deterministic. X at T naught is X naught. The notation W is to denote the set of the standard Wiener processes between 0 and capital T. Mu, sigma are drift and diffusion coefficients. They are both assumed to be measurable. We have already discussed this last semester, why we need them to be measurable, so that we can create FT adapted portfolios. Actually, this is T naught. Now, for this particular SDE, the Ito-Taylor expansion or the Ito expansion will be, if I were talking about the integral in approximate sense, it would be xt equal to xt naught plus mu integral ds sigma xt naught integral dw plus half times sigma prime, the difference in Wiener process square minus T naught, which is the expectation of this, plus R. So this is like our first order Taylor series expansion for the SDE, which is also called the Ito-Taylor expansion. So what we are doing is we are expanding the whole integral around T naught, taking the mu and sigma evaluated at xt naught outside, so that we have a relatively simple integral here. And the second term is to accommodate the variance here. And the variance, as we know, is of the order of t. So this will be the second term indicating the variance with a typical half sigma prime coefficient because of the second derivative, plus R, where R is the remainder term. So is this clear? What we are trying to do here? We are making a simple Taylor series expansion around T naught or xt naught.
Yes, sir, it is clear.
Great. So this is our starting point for most of the applications, this is our starting point. We have to take an approximation, and this looks like a reasonable approximation, particularly because of the reason that after all we are using normal distribution. So the first two moments characterizes the distribution. Once we have this Ito-Taylor expansion, we can now construct numerical integration scheme for the SD. Now you can see that I have this expression as the integral of this dxt, and now I will need some numerical process to evaluate this integral 6.51. But of course, an SDE, this SDE defines the evolution of a random process over a continuous time period, T0 to T. So there are infinitely many points. So naturally, we cannot simulate an SDE exactly because of the practical computational constraints. The computer is a finite machine, so I can only simulate the SDE at discrete time points. So what we do is, we generate samples of the discretized version of the SDE at a finite number of points. Let us call that delta t, 2 delta t up to m delta t, where m is the number of time steps and delta t is the length of the interval. So if the total length of the interval is capital T or capital T, then delta t is t by m. So you can say that this capital T, or you can also use t minus t naught. So I can just take t naught equal to 0 here. So formally, these points t1, t2, t1, t2, tj up to tm, the x values where tj is t naught plus j delta t, these are my sample points. This is wrong. And again, as delta t approaches 0, our discretized path will converge towards the theoretical continuous time path, or so we hope. But we can always use some results and some properties of the normal distribution later on to show that this is indeed the case, that our discretized path actually converges to the theoretical path. Now let us look at any piece here, any interval tj, tj plus 1. So what do we do here? So in a piece tj, tj plus 1, so if we choose t naught equal to tj and t equal to tj plus 1 here, so it is basically we are looking at just one piece in the whole interval. Delta t is this, the length of time, and delta wj is nothing but the winner process evaluated at tj plus 1 minus what is evaluated at tj. So these are my approximations for 651. So now consider that I am actually talking about the interval tj to tj plus 1, a relatively small piece of the whole interval, and I am going to use this approximation with these objects. So what do we get here? So x tj plus 1, which is xt, is equal to xtj. So let me keep both together. No, that is not going to happen. Anyway. Okay, so xt is xtj plus 1, xt naught is now xtj, mu is evaluated at xtj times delta t, because that is the value of this integral now, tj to tj plus 1, sigma xtj delta wj, because that is the value of this integral here, plus half sigma sigma prime both evaluated at xtj times delta wj square, this thing, minus delta t, this thing, t minus t naught plus r. So for one of the pieces in the whole interval, 6.53 is my approximation. And this is the approximation that we are going to use. Now, how do we arrive at a good numerical value for this approximation? That would be our first target. Now, there are various schemes for simulating SDEs of this form. How do I get at good values? Using reasonable simulation schemes. And we are going to talk about three schemes: Euler, Milstein, and Runge-Kutta. So these are three of the most popular simulation schemes which we will talk about here. Now, Euler scheme is the simplest. Euler scheme is basically the first order approximation. So what do? We keep only the first three terms in the expansion and ignore the sigma sigma prime term altogether. So I put this whole thing in R. So I just say that in the explicit Euler method, xtj plus 1 hat is xtj plus mu delta t sigma delta w. Now delta w, we know that this has the following expression in terms of standard normal distribution. Delta wj will have root over of delta t sigma equal to root over of delta t, and zj is some normal 0, 1 random variables. So Euler scheme simply ignores the sigma sigma prime term, this second derivative term, and uses only the trend part, so to say, the linear, not the trend part, the linear part here, to arrive at an approximation for x. Of course, the approximation is now of the order of delta t. This expands the drift term to order of delta t, but the diffusion term only to order of root delta t. So omitting this second term, which is essentially the diffusion term. So the order of the magnitude of error is obviously not very good. Okay. So before I proceed, so have you used Euler scheme earlier in a problem? Is Euler scheme familiar to you? Because you may have done some stochastic data generating processes.
No, sir.
No. Okay. Okay. So then the two is the scheme clear? What we are trying to do? Because initially we started out with this expansion, which is taking up to the second derivative term and putting everything else in the remainder. We wrote it in a numerical form in 6.53, the same expression in a discretized form, but it still had the second derivative here. But in the Euler scheme, we ignore the second derivative term altogether to arrive at a more simplified but also less precise approximation. So is this clear?
Yes, sir. The path is clear.
The path is clear. Okay. Now, of course, this is not great because I am using the diffusion term only up to the order of root over of delta t. So I should be able to do better. So what happens in the Milstein scheme, which is our second scheme, is that the Milstein scheme improves upon Euler by adding the second diffusion term, so that the diffusion term is expanded up to the order of delta t. And the basic idea is I simply keep all the terms in 653. I also include this remaining term from 653. So now my discretized approximation look like the first part is same as in the Euler scheme up to this mu sigma square root delta t, but I also want to add the diffusion term here, half sigma sigma prime. So in 653 I have half sigma sigma prime delta wj square minus delta t. So here that is modeled as delta t times zj square minus 1. Because if I look at delta wj square, it is like a chi-square. So I can take delta t common, because that will be the sigma square for this chi-square. So if I take delta t common, this will become a square of a standard normal random variable minus 1. So this is what it is here in 654. Okay. Okay, is this scheme clear? I just want to keep all the terms in 653. So I rewrite the discretized version in terms of a standard normal random variable.
Yes, sir.
But the catch, the cost for the Milstein scheme is I am retaining this sigma prime term, which is del x sigma xt. So Milstein scheme has a better order, higher order of discretization. It goes up to order of delta t, as you can see. It also requires knowing the first derivative of the volatility function. So the first derivative of the volatility function either has to be known, which will be typically not known in any real application. So the first derivative itself has to be approximated properly. So the restriction with the Milstein scheme is that I needed to know sigma prime, but in real life, I would not know what the volatility function looks like, the analytical form of it. So I will need to also approximate the derivative. And that is what the Runge-Kutta scheme essentially does. So this scheme is actually the most popular scheme in numerical work. So whenever you write numerical routines or call numerical subroutines, most of the time you will see that the Runge-Kutta scheme is being called. So what happens with this one? So I know that Milstein scheme improves on the accuracy over the Euler scheme. That's true. But it also requires knowledge of the first derivative of the volatility function, which may not be available, or even if it is available, it might be very expensive to compute. Derivatives are typically expensive computation. So what does this scheme do for us? The Runge-Kutta scheme allows us to avoid using the first derivative of the volatility function by using the Runge-Kutta approximation. So it uses a nice approximation so that I can still keep the same order of accuracy. But because I am using an approximation, I don't need to get into evaluation of the derivative. So let us see. So how does it work? So we start now from a Taylor expansion of the volatility function. So remember, our data generating process allows for a state dependent volatility function. This is our generic SD. So sigma is a function of xt itself. And that's what potentially makes the setup reasonably complicated. So we start with the Taylor expansion of the volatility function around xi, some starting point xi. So sigma at xi plus delta xi is now written as sigma xi plus sigma prime delta x, and order of delta x square is the area. Now delta xi is mu xi delta t plus sigma xi delta wi. That's what we take. So what are we doing? We are essentially taking a first order approximation of this. So delta xi here, as in the Euler scheme, is approximated by mu delta t and sigma delta w. Okay. So delta xi is approximated by mu xi delta t, sigma xi delta w, as in the Euler scheme. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what do we do? So we now plug this delta xi value in this difference. So I'm looking at sigma xi plus delta xi minus sigma xi, as in here, which is sigma prime xi delta x. So delta x I now replace by this Eulerian approximation plus the error as before. And now this error is actually of the order of delta t. So what I do is I write this whole expression as sigma prime sigma delta w plus some term of order delta t. So what do? I collect the mu and the order of delta x squared terms together and put them in order of delta t. So that is my error of approximation. So what I am doing is I am trying to arrive at a reasonable approximation for sigma prime in an indirect way. Okay. So delta t terms are collected here and delta x square is of the same order of delta t. Now again look at sigma of xi plus delta xi. After substituting for delta xi by adding and subtracting the term sigma xi root over of delta t, we can get the following. So sigma xi plus delta xi can be written as sigma xi plus mu xi delta t plus sigma xi delta wi, because that is delta xi. We already know this. And this I can write as sigma xi plus mu xi delta t plus sigma xi root delta t plus this thing and then subtracting the same term again. So I'm basically adding and subtracting the same term. And what am I doing? I'm basically trying to make a centering here. So it is just adding and subtracting, nothing else. Now use another Taylor expansion. Again, sigma xi plus delta xi. I am expanding. Now I am expanding around this point. So what is happening here? So this is the same expression as 6.56 here with an addition subtractions artificially. Now what am I doing? I am now expanding it around this point up to this part. Xi plus mu delta t plus sigma root delta t. This I consider as my starting point and this as my h. It's like x plus h. So I get sigma evaluated at this point plus sigma prime evaluated at this point again times sigma, then this magnitude of error, and the remainder terms are all collected in this term here, which would be the order of the next higher power. So order of delta w minus root delta t whole square. And you can see that this will be nothing but order of delta t. This whole remainder term will be of the order of delta t. So what do we get? So this I can write again as the first term as before, the second term as before, and order of delta t. So sigma xi plus delta xi can be alternatively expressed using the Taylor expansion around this particular point as in equation 657. And finally, we use a last Taylor expansion for the term sigma prime around this point. Because I have this here inside, sigma prime evaluated at this point. This I write around xi, So sigma prime xi equal to this term with a second derivative plus remainder terms, which I can simply say is of the order sigma prime xi plus order of root delta t. So this is a very crude approximation of sigma prime at this particular point. So I'm just looking at the change in sigma prime over two nearby points and approximating with an error of order of root delta t. So this expression I will now substitute back into here. I have this whole argument inside, which I want to simplify by this simpler argument. So I will have sigma xi plus delta xi, which is the left-hand side here, equal to sigma evaluated at this point as before, plus sigma prime now evaluated at only xi, then sigma xi, the error, and again I will have some error involving this order, so I will put them back here. And this will totally become order of delta t because I have another root delta t outside. I had one root delta t here inside, times another root delta t. So finally it will be order of delta t. So sigma xi plus delta xi can be written as a sigma plus a sigma prime sigma term as in 659. Now I put this back into this earlier equation here. So I have already had one approximation for this difference. 659, I have another approximation. So I substitute and cancel the common term sigma prime sigma. I had a sigma prime sigma delta wi. Here also I have a sigma prime sigma delta wi. So they will get cancelled. So what I will finally get is sigma at this point minus sigma at delta xi equal to sigma prime sigma root over of delta t and order of delta t error, which will finally give me my approximation, numerical approximation for sigma prime. So I write sigma prime sigma as 1 by root delta t times this difference. So what is going to happen is, I look at the Milstein scheme. In the Milstein scheme, I had this sigma times sigma prime term here, which required evaluation of the derivative. So the Runge-Kutta scheme simply uses Taylor expansion 3 times to create a reasonable approximation for the term sigma prime. So what we finally do is we plug this expression back into 654, the Milstein scheme, and we finally get what we call the Runge-Kutta scheme. Runge-Kutta scheme gives me xi plus 1 equal to xi plus mu plus sigma, these terms as before. The correction term in 654, the diffusion term involves sigma prime, that will be replaced. That will be replaced by this expression here, plus the delta w whole square minus delta t as before, where this xi hat notation is to write a shorthand for this whole argument inside. Xi hat is this point. Okay, so let me just go back once more and check whether we have got everything in order. We wanted to use the Milstein scheme because of its better approximation, higher order, but we wanted to replace sigma prime because evaluating sigma prime directly may be expensive. So Runge-Kutta scheme uses the Taylor series expansion for both the original data generating process as well as the volatility function itself. So if I use the Taylor series expansion cleverly for the volatility function, we are able to get an approximate expression for sigma prime sigma in terms of only sigma. So I can avoid evaluating the derivative directly. And this expression is plugged back into the Milstein scheme to give us the Runge-Kutta scheme, which is same order of error, but it avoids evaluating the sigma prime, which is typically expensive. Okay, so we have used the Taylor series a little bit too much. So is this all clear, or are there doubts here which we need to clarify? I know it's a little bit of dirty algebra that went on, but it is just Taylor series. So is this clear?
Sir, this is overall clear, but there are various steps involved. Several steps involved.
There are three major steps involved, all using the Taylor expansion. So yeah, I understand. So maybe we need to take the break now, and you can check this and get back after the break. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I think we will take a break. So before I proceed, let me first ask you the question I did before the break. So have you checked the Rangekutta scheme and are the details clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So it is just Taylor series, using it again and again to finally arrive at an approximation for sigma sigma prime. So there is nothing very complicated going on. It is just some dirty algebra, but it avoids the evaluation of the derivative, which is often expensive. Okay, so let me share my screen. And so before we move further, a trivial comment that if my sigma function is indeed a constant, then the Milstein, Rangekutta, etc., they will all reduce to the simple Euler scheme, because sigma prime would then be 0 and Euler scheme would then be sufficient for my work. Okay, so with that, let us now begin talking about the specific models that we discussed in chapter 1 and used later in chapter 2, 3, and 4. So we'll start with the simplest model, geometric Brownian motion, as discussed in section 1.2.1, where both the mu and the sigma are indeed constants. So mu xt and sigma, so this the simplest model. In the simplest model, we know that we don't need to simulate paths because we do have the analytical solution. Xt is actually x naught e to the power this thing, so it's a log normal distribution. It is known, and we can simulate xt directly. So we don't need to discretize or anything like that. And we know that W capital T follows square root of capital T normal 0, 1. So whatever we need to simulate, we can simulate directly on the solution. No need to go through the sample paths. The next model that we want to talk about is the Ornstein-Uhlenbeck mean reversion process. This is section 1.2.5, which is given by dxt kappa theta minus xt dt plus sigma dw. Again, analytical solution is available. We know the explicit integral. So the only thing that we need to evaluate is this stochastic integral in the end, which we can do directly. So there is again no need for discretization. Then we move on to the Cox-Ingersoll-Ross process, CIR process, which is a generalization of the Ornstein-Uhlenbeck process. So now we make theta dependent on time and sigma dependent on the state. So sigma is now replaced by sigma square root of xt. So remember, this was done to avoid the stock price from going negative. So we made this adjustment so that the probability of the stock price becoming negative is 0. Now for CIR process, there is no explicit solution to the SDE directly. So I cannot have an analytical expression. The CIR with a time varying theta t, the distribution is not available. And now one method of simulating xt indirectly is actually discretizing and simulating the differential equation as in here. So from CIR process onward, we are actually going to have to rely on simulation methods for generating paths of dxt. So we have to look at the general structure as in here, this particular generating equation where mu sigma are given by particular choices, and start using different schemes, in particular Rangekutta schemes if possible, and generate the process. Let us also talk about the next important model, the Heston's stochastic volatility model. So that is very important in application work. This is section is 1.2.3, the first time it was discussed. So this requires a pair of equation. because the volatility itself is stochastic. So I have the stock price generating process as in RSTDT. The trend part is same as the usual Brownian motion. The volatility part, instead of sigma, I have a square root of Vt. The rest is same as before, ST, dW, ST. Now, how is this Vt generated? This Vt is generated by a CIR process. So it is a mean reverting trend and sigma square root of Vt variance. So this is the volatility of volatility. So we have seen this before, so no need to discuss in detail, but here we are involved in generating paths simultaneously for a two equation system. And we typically also consider the two Brownian motion components, Ws and Wv, to be correlated with some rate rho. So these two need not be independent. So conditional on some time s, some starting time s, Euler discretization of the variance process will look like this. So for the variance process, we do a Euler discretization, a first order discretization, simpler method. So for any t greater than s, I can write Vt equal to Vs minus the strength part times delta t, now that replaces dt, sigma square root of Vs, so this is Vt evaluated at time s, Wv is replaced by square root of delta t times Zv, where Zv again as usual follows normal 0, 1. So delta t is my time step, t minus s. So that's the Eulerian approximation for the variance process. Now again, one can show that the above scheme can go negative with some positive probability, and it's a major issue with this scheme. So to fix it, what people usually employ is called a truncation scheme. So the one that seems to work the best is produced by a full truncation scheme that will choose f1x equal to x, f2 and f3 equal to maximum of x and 0. That's as in the truncation scheme. So the resulting final equation will look like Vt equal to Vs minus kappa theta minus Vs plus. So Vs plus is maximum of Vs and 0, delta t. Again, square root of Vs plus delta t Zv. So the truncation scheme is that cuts off as soon as x becomes negative. So having this discretization scheme for the variance, now we will move on to the asset price process. Again, the most straightforward choice would be to either directly apply the Euler discretization scheme for DST or to simulate the price process from its exact conditional distribution. So here I have two choices. One is I can also use a Euler scheme or some other sophisticated scheme for DST, or knowing the process for Vt or having simulated this process for Vt, conditioning on Vt, I can find the analytical expression for DST, because if I condition on Vt, then this is the usual geometric Brownian motion model, and I can analytically evaluate DST. So direct discretization, if I use it using the Euler scheme, then direct discretization will look like the following: that ST will be S at time S, RST delta T, SS same thing. So that's the Euler scheme discretization. Or I can directly apply the Ito's lemma, conditioning on V, of course, to get ST equal to S at S e to the power this integral, which is the usual analytical expression as in here, as in the geometric Brownian motion. Because once I condition on V, this sigma becomes known, so I can find the analytical expression. So these are the two alternatives. I can either use the Eulerian scheme again, or I can directly use the analytical expression. And then once I get the final expression, I can evaluate it by taking log and utilizing the Euler discretization on the solution. So I can say that log st will be log s at s plus this thing delta t, which is the approximation for this integral, and square root of vs plus root over delta t zs, which is the approximation for this second integral. So again, the integrals, the functions are evaluated at the starting point, taken outside. So the integral becomes very simple. I can evaluate them directly. I have to remember that the two Brownian motions were correlated. So I need to choose Zs not independently, but as rho Zv plus root over of 1 minus rho square Z. So this is the standard trick for creating correlated random numbers. So you already have Zv, you have generated Zv earlier here. So you create a correlated Zs. How you generate a new standard normal random variable Z and combine these two in this particular way. So Zs and Zv are correlated with rate rho. Okay. Okay, is this scheme clear for the
Yes, sir.
Hessian model? The variance process, I am definitely going to discretize and simulate. So I can use an Euler scheme. The stock price process, I can either go the analytical way and then approximate the integral, or I can also generate path using the Eulerian scheme. And remember that the two Brownian motion components, Zs, Zv, needs to be correlated. Okay, so that's the Heston model, which is quite popular. What is also very popular is the variance gamma model. The variance gamma process, section 1.2.7, formally the VG process, and the notation is xt with parameters sigma, nu, and theta. So how is this obtained? This is obtained by evaluating a Brownian motion with drift theta and volatility sigma at a random time. So T is generated from a random process, random time given by a gamma process with mean 1 and variance nu. So this nu is contributing to the arrival time, random time. Sigma and theta are contributing to the Brownian motion with the drift and volatility. So finally, the equation would look like this. So again, we have discussed it before. So this is just a recap that x evaluated at t, which is same as theta. Instead of t or dt, I have this random time. Sigma w, again w evaluated at this random time. We have already seen that it has an explicit characteristic function given by this expression here. This characteristic function has been discussed before. So if I assume the stock price process is given by the geometric variance gamma law, which means the log stock price is given by this kind of an equation with parameters sigma, nu, theta, then the log price is explicitly given by log st equal to log s naught plus this times t plus x. So x is this, same as this variance gamma process, where omega is our mean correction. The Jensen inequality correction is done through this omega. Omega is given by this expression, which again we have evaluated earlier. So that the risk neutral value of R minus Q mean rate is maintained. So this was our variance gamma process. Now, variance gamma has various new features. So in addition to the volatility of the normal distribution sigma, there are parameters that controls for kurtosis. So nu actually controls kurtosis, long-tailedness, which is a symmetric increase in the left and right tail probabilities relative to the normal distribution. So thicker tail. It also controls skewness through the parameter theta that allows for the asymmetry of left and right tails. An additional feature of this model is that it nests the log normal density and the Black-Scholes formula as parametric special case. So if I put nu equal to 0 and theta equal to 0, I will get back the Black-Scholes formula. And also there is a closed form formula for pricing European options when the underlying asset follows the log VG process in terms of the special functions, and this is the reference for that. So for restricted path independent European options, we can find analytical expressions for the derivative terms. But in general, that is not available. So we need a simulation scheme for the variance gamma process. So let us assume that we have n equidistant time intervals of each of length h. So basically h is t by n. To sample for a time interval of length h, we sample from a gamma distribution with mean h and variance nu h. So this is how we calibrate the model. So gamma process with the shape parameter alpha and scale parameter beta has this PDF. We know this PDF already, where mean will be alpha times beta and variance will be alpha beta square. In our case, we want alpha beta to be equal to h, mean, and alpha beta square to be nu h, which means alpha becomes h by nu and beta becomes nu. So this alpha and beta has the specific values for our simulation scheme. So a sample for the VG process xh for the time step h with parameters sigma, nu, and theta will be given by theta g h by nu comma nu plus sigma square root of g h by nu comma nu times z. So this g is the gamma random variable. So z follows normal 0, 1 and g h by nu comma nu is the gamma random variable with parameters h by nu as alpha, nu as beta. Okay, is the scheme clear so far? So I am trying to simulate for a small time step. So I calibrate the alpha and beta of the gamma random variable for the arrival time accordingly, and the choices turn out to be this two. Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Right. So this is a simple algorithm for simulating this process. So whatever we have discussed so far, this is the pseudo code for that. So for I equal to 1 to capital N, because I want capital N many such samples. Z I sample from normal 0, 1. G I sample from gamma random variable with h by nu comma nu, and xi is generated as theta g plus sigma root g z. Finally, for the log of stock price, we will have log SI equal to log SI minus 1. This is the time step. R minus Q times H, as in here, plus omega H, where omega has to be evaluated separately, plus Xi. So this is coming from this equation here, R minus Q plus omega T. T is replaced by H, and X is the Xi that we draw. So this would be a simple algorithm to generate paths for our variance gamma process for a small time interval where alpha and beta for the gamma are calibrated accordingly. Now, another important extension of the variance gamma process is the one with stochastic arrivals. So this we discussed in section 1.2.10. So this is variance gamma with stochastic arrivals, and we have already seen that the characteristic function can again be evaluated in a rather complicated manner, some long tedious algebra, but the final result was given by this, where this psi inside is the variance gamma characteristic function. So this variance gamma with stochastic arrival is given. The characteristic function is known and is given by this theorem. Now with the closed form for the VGSA characteristic function for the log price, one can employ various transform techniques to price European call and put options. So path independent options, it would be not straightforward, but analytically possible to find the prices because we know the characteristic function. The resulting model may be used to estimate parameter values consistent with market option prices for vanilla options. So if I have data on prices of the simple vanilla options, call and puts, and I also have the analytical formula for the corresponding prices using this characteristic function, I can calibrate my parameters. All the unknown parameters that are involved in this model can be estimated. So I have data on all the option prices across entire strike and maturity spectrum. I use that as my input data. I can estimate my parameters through the characteristic function. So I do have a set of estimates for the parameters. So if I am now faced with a more complicated derivative contract for which I do not have an analytical expression, a path-dependent derivative, for instance, I will need to simulate my VGSA process. So to simulate the VGSA process, again as before, we assume n equidistant time intervals. We would like to simulate this over each subinterval h. So at time t plus h. So how do we do this? We write delta zt. So this is slightly complicated. So we write delta zt equal to zt minus h. So use the backward difference, which is now given by, so zt is given by this usual variance gamma expression with the stochastic arrival yt put in here instead of t. So this is evaluated at t and t minus h. Now if I collect terms, the theta terms I can write together, and the sigma w gamma terms I can write together in this way, because again I know that the standard error for this Wiener process will have a square root order, square root of the parameter inside. So this is my sigma square, so I will write sigma, so I will write square root. So sigma times square root of this gamma minus gamma times z. So I will need the first part, the theta terms together, and the w terms together in this order, and replace the Wiener process by standard normal random variable z. Okay? Does it make sense?
Yes, sir.
Again, I need to calibrate my alpha and beta. So here beta will again be nu, and alpha will be yt by nu, h by nu will be now yt by nu, which implies this expression here, this under the square root, this expression, or here inside theta, this expression, difference of the gammas, will be given by the difference of these two gamma random variables, which I can write as gamma with a new parameter set by the summation property of the gamma processes, because we can assume that the differences are independent. So gamma over disjoint intervals are independent. So what I need is a gamma random variable with parameter yt minus h by nu, comma nu. Hence, my delta zt will be finally given by theta times this new gamma random variable plus sigma times square root of this gamma random variable times z. Yt is the stochastic arrival time, so it is expressed through an integral. So yt minus h is this integral over t minus h to t of yud. So for simulation, we first start by discretization of the CIR process for this arrival time. If I use a Milstein discretization of CIR, I will get this yj equal to yj minus 1 plus kappa eta yj minus 1 h is the time step, this is the variance part, and lambda square by 4 h, and z square is the because of the w square term. So just to recall, the Milstein scheme, I'll go back. The Milstein scheme required initial point mu delta t, sigma root delta t zg, and then sigma prime term. So which required a z square. So it required a z square here for this second derivative term. So in case of the CIR process, which we require here, in case of the CIR process, this will be yj equal to initial value. This is the dt term. This is the dw term, and then I have the second derivative term, lambda square by 4 h z square minus 1. So that is my full CIR discretization scheme. And as usual, yj is approximating ytj, tj is jh, etc. So for this interval tj minus 1 tj, for this kind of small intervals, the new time or the new clock is given by this integral yu du, as I have written here. And we use a trapezoidal rule to evaluate that integral, simple trapezoidal rule. So this integral will be replaced by h by 2, average of these two values. So I have the arrival process here in terms of a trapezoidal rule, and I know that it is related like this. So to simulate the VGSA, we will do the following. So again, for j equal to 1 to n, we will generate a normal random variable. Yj will be given by yj minus 1 plus this thing. This is the Milstein scheme, as we have discussed, where tj hat is given by this trapezoidal rule integral, the new time. G is a gamma random variable with this tj hat by nu times nu, comma nu, because tj hat is going to be put in here. Remember, tj hat is notation for yt minus h. So that will go in here as the numerator of the first parameter, alpha. So the gamma random variable will be generated using tj by nu, comma nu. Tj comes from here. Z normal. So xj will be given by theta g plus sigma square root of g times z. So the only change from the earlier variance gamma is in generating the new time, the new random time. And that new random time is created from the CIR process using this arrival process here. And that arrival process is approximated by a trapezoidal rule. So instead of the integral, I have this simple trapezoidal rule, which is then used as the time for arrival. So that's the full scheme for the VGSA process. Again, xj is an approximation to delta z tj. And of course, an alternative is to use the scaling property of gamma process. So that also we should mention here. So we can use the scaling property because alpha beta are related in a particular way. So again, z is normal 0, 1. Yj comes from the Milstein scheme. The random time is also the trapezoidal rule. Yes? Any questions at this point? Okay. So instead of a sigma hat, I use a sigma and then square root of tj hat, which is the random time. I generate nu as nu by tj hat, theta, nu theta as theta times tj hat, use the scaling property. So finally, I will create the gamma random variable. It will come to the same thing using 1 by nu hat, comma nu hat. So xj will be given by this again. So these three intermediate steps are just using the scaling property of gamma process instead of directly putting them here. Instead of directly putting them here, we use the scaling property and use it in 2 steps. For the log stock price, we have this direct expression that log st is log s naught plus r minus q times t zt minus log of expectation of e to the power z. Log st minus h, same expression. So if I subtract, I'll get log st equal to log st minus h plus this correction term, log of difference, difference of the log expectations. Now what do? I write zt minus h as delta zt, and this difference of log expectation as delta omega t. So the stock price data generating process will go like this. Again, for j equal to 1 to n, delta omega j hat is given by the difference in the two log values. So then log sj will be log sj minus 1, r minus qh, this difference plus mu xj. Xj is the error term. So VGSA, for VGSA, we needed the additional random time. So if I put that in, so there are two parts here to evaluate. So delta zt we get like this, and using that delta zt, finally the log stock price model here is given by this expression. I think this is the right expression. So this is just in terms of the difference of log st and log st minus h, which will be using for simulation. Okay, so again, the variance gamma and variance gamma with stochastic arrivals are slightly complicated processes, but once you understand that the basic generating process is a gamma random variable, then moving from variance gamma to variance gamma with stochastic arrival is not so hard conceptually. Of course, algebraically is a lot more complicated because I have to handle the random time using a CIR process, etc., etc. So a lot of new computational elements come in, but the basic structure is based on the gamma random variable in both these processes. So these are very important models for computational finance, because whenever we are faced with non-normal possibilities, this variance gamma process is usually the first candidate that we look at, because it is relatively better known analytically. We have analytical expressions for characteristic functions. So at least for path independent options, we know how to go about it. Even when we have path dependent options, we can at least calibrate our parameters from the market data and then use them to generate sample paths in the way we have just described. Okay, so I will stop here. Are there questions at this point? So I understand computational schemes are often tedious, but once you understand the logic, the remaining algebraic details one need not memorize. They would be used in a computer program, but understanding the logic and the concept is important. Okay, so if there are no questions at this point, then we will finish the class today and we meet on Friday usual time.
Sir, I had a question regarding assignment. So the second part of the assignment was to a numerical extension of the paper that we are going to submit. So
Yes.
what are you expecting there as a numerical extension in the paper, in the research
Okay.
paper? Like what are your
So,
expectations?
so my expectation would be the following, that you are supposed to select a paper with some computational aspect. So the paper itself would have some algorithm for the model that is described and some numerical results, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. What I expect from you in the second, in the continuing assignment is you will be using a different computational strategy for the same theoretical model, coming up with numerical results, actual results, to contrast with the original results from the paper.
Okay.
So for a very simple example, suppose the paper talks about a variance gamma process and uses a Euler scheme. Now, in the second part of the project, you might then use a Runge-Gupta scheme and redo the computation. Of course, it is more complicated, so it will take more computational time, but the precision of the result should be better. So that kind of contrast you should be able to make.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so
And yes, and if suppose the paper gives just the about talks about the theoretical result and does not give any strategy, then coming up with a scheme is also an extension, right?
exactly. So if the computational strategy in the paper is a null set, then you have to come up with a computational strategy.
Okay. So numerical extension means coming up with some of these strategy for that
Yeah.
whatever uh, thing we're using. Okay. Okay.
Use
Yeah.
use any of the strategies which make sense in this context that we have discussed and show the numerical results.
Okay. Sir. Yeah. That's it. Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. So then probably we should call it a day and we meet on Friday again.